So good morning and welcome to the Cromwell Museum. My name's Stuart Orme, I'm the museum's curator, and it's my great pleasure to give you a very brief tour of some of the treasures that we've got inside the Cromwell Museum. One of the things that is one of our treasures is this wonderful building just here. This is where the museum is based. This is the oldest building in Huntingdon, some 800 years old. Originally it was a medieval monastic hospital, then by the Tudor period it became the local grammar school. Amongst the boys who went to school here was both Oliver Cromwell, who was born on the street from here, spent over half his life here in Huntingdon, and also the famous diarist Samuel Pepys also went to school in this building. It's been the Cromwell Museum since 1962, and today we've got the best collection in the world of some of the items relating to the soldier and statesman Oliver Cromwell. So we're going to go inside now and have a look at some of those. So Sir Oliver Cromwell first comes to prominence during the English Civil War. Prior to that, he'd been a country gentleman here in Huntingdon and in Cambridgeshire, having property first of all here in Huntingdon, then living in St Ives, and then finally in Ely. He then became Member of Parliament, first for Huntingdon and then for Cambridge. At the beginning of the Civil War, he was pretty much a backbench MP that nobody'd ever heard of. He rose to prominence because of his skills as a soldier during the British Civil Wars of the 1640s. Amongst the many treasures we've got associated with Cromwell, these amazing swords just here. There are 4 swords known in existence to have belonged to Cromwell. We've got 3 of them, one of which is associated with him having been Lord Protector, left and right hand ones here, and 2 of his original battle swords. So again, tying with Cromwell's campaigns in the Civil War, we've got some representative examples here of the sorts of arms and equipment that would have been used at the time of the British Civil Wars in the mid-17th century. Some of the items on display here belong to us. We're very privileged to also have some items here on long-term loan to us from the collections of the Royal Armouries. So some of the quite iconic items that are associated with the Civil War period and actually would have been used by both sides during the Civil War. We tend to think of this cavalryman's equipment here as being worn by Cromwell's Ironsides, but actually would have been worn by cavalrymen on both sides at this time, and it would have been virtually impossible to tell the 2 sides apart. So literally the case of the Civil War where both sides virtually unrecognisable from each other. We're privileged to have here, as I say, in the Cromwell Museum, some of the best items in the world associated with Oliver Cromwell. Some absolutely beautiful treasures that are personal items that have been handed down through his family over the last 370 years or so. So at the top here is this beautiful Italian chest decorated with marble and stone decorations, which dates to the 1650s. What's called a Florentine chest, a cabinet that would have originally contained small pots containing soaps and perfumes and other items. It was given to Cromwell as a diplomatic gift in 1656 by the Grand Duke of Tuscany. At the bottom here is what is reputed to be Cromwell's medical chest. We believe that it is. Dates to the late 16th century. A travelling cabinet like this, which would have accompanied him wherever he went, with the pills and potions that he needed in order to look after his health. Might have gone on campaign with him, certainly was owned by him by the time he was Lord Protector, and it also contained some quite fearsome looking instruments which would have been used for dispensing some of these cures and also practicing things like bleeding, for example. So this is one of the most famous images of Oliver Cromwell. This is a portrait of him by Sir Peter Lely. Reputedly, when Lely painted the portrait, he said to him, "How would you like to be painted?" And Cromwell, of course, famously said to him, "Well, I'd like to be painted as I am, pimples and warts and all. And if you don't paint me like that, I shan't pay you a farthing for it." So this is the famous warts and all portrait of Cromwell. That's very much like the view we try to put across here at the museum. It's Cromwell as a rounded individual and indeed warts and all. He's a controversial figure. He often strikes strong emotions from people. Some people love him or hate him. Whether you like him or not, there are parts of his career which are very difficult to deal with, including the campaign in Ireland, the trial of Charles I. However, he is definitely an important figure in British history. Love him or hate him, you can't ignore him. And indeed, that's why Cromwell is worthy of study, why we encourage you to come here to the Cromwell Museum to find out more about him. People often have a lot of preconceptions about Oliver Cromwell. Not all of them are terribly accurate. Quite often, because of popular culture and images from the Victorian period, we tend to view him as being a dour, black-clad figure, rather miserable, not enjoying anything in the slightest. In actual fact, the evidence doesn't necessarily quite portray that sort of figure. For instance, this is a figure, or rather a painting of Cromwell dating to the 1650s. One of several we've got of him wearing extremely elaborate clothing. He liked to dress to impress. In fact, there are no contemporary images of Cromwell wearing black. He actually seems to have been quite a devoted family man, a man who actually had a very good sense of humour, enjoyed music, dancing, and indeed horse racing. So perhaps some of the preconceptions we might have might be challenged here until we visit the museum. So we're very privileged to have a very good collection of 17th century portraiture here. In our collection we have works by Sir Peter Lely, by William Dobson, by Robert Walker, by Samuel Cooper. Most of the great artists of the mid-17th century are represented here within our displays. And of course they cover sort of some of Cromwell's contemporaries, the man himself, and of course many members of his family. This is one of only two large-scale portraits that exists of Richard Cromwell, his eldest surviving son, who of course briefly became Lord Protector after Cromwell died. The other portrait, it's worth saying, is at Chequers, the Prime Minister's house, so it's generally seen by members of the public. So this is a very rare painting that we've got here and privileged to have in our collections. So here in this case is perhaps one of the more macabre objects associated with Oliver Cromwell, and this is a copy of his death mask. The day after his death, a wax impression was taken of his face, as was common practice at this time, in order to make a death mask that could be used for his funeral, for funeral effigies. There are lots of examples of death masks of Oliver Cromwell that survive. We can tell this is an early one here because the wart on the forehead is missing. For some reason, the original wax cast of Oliver Cromwell's face didn't pick up the wart on his forehead. We don't know whether it had dropped off by this time or simply the cast didn't pick it up for some reason. However, later Victorian copies of the death mask put the wart back on again, because the Victorians didn't think that it looked enough like Oliver Cromwell without a full set of warts. And indeed, you can always tell when they were made in the Victorian period because different artists put the wart in different places. So a case of Cromwell and his wandering wart, if you like. So here we have probably the most iconic, and for many people their favourite item in the museum's collection, which of course is Oliver Cromwell's hat. It's a remarkable survival, a wool felt hat dating to the 1650s, passed down in Cromwell's family over the last 370 years as having belonged to the man himself. Family legend has it that Cromwell wore this particular hat when he dismissed the Rump Parliament in 1653. It's become such an iconic object and many people's favourite that we actually have a copy of it here in the museum for people to try on when they visit, should they be inclined to do so. Great opportunity for a selfie. But it's also, of course, what we use as part of the museum's logo. So it's just one of the many treasures here in the museum which we hope you will take the opportunity to come and visit. Do come and see us.